Well, welcome back to the Azure Podcast. This is episode number 428. Today we have a special guest, repeat guest, Asir Selvasingh, who's going to talk to us about a topic, well, something related to Java. We know when we have Asir on the show, it's going to be something related to Java. He's our Java expert that has been on our show many times before. But before we get to him, let's quickly talk about some of the news that hit the Azure space this past week. I believe, Kale, you put a bunch in there. Do you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. I just have three things here today. The first one's around, I didn't even realize this was a show. Maybe we've talked about it before, but there's this series or group of things called Inside Azure for IT, which are these kind of fireside chat series that include all kinds of like video and audio and things like that. But they're basically talking about some of the innovations that are being driven by industries in Azure. And there's a couple of them called out here around some of the Hollywood type stuff for the animations and visual effects and how they're using Azure to do that, including some things around Star Wars and things like that, which is pretty cool. And then some stuff around NAS's Jet Propulsion Lab and some other things around self-driving cars and things like that that are being kind of used in Azure. So it's pretty neat. I didn't even realize there was a series out there. So if I missed it, I'm sorry, guys. But it was they're pretty interesting and they're relatively short. Like our podcast, they seem to be like 20, 30 minutes. Some of them are even shorter, so it's pretty cool. The second thing was around responsible AI investments, and this was one from a product manager on the AI team in Azure, talking about some of the core priorities of the team and some of the principles around this responsible AI standard that's been talked about from Microsoft for quite some time, as well as other companies, and talks about some of the new limited access policies and the classifiers that they're using inside of AI to remove sensitive attributes and things like that in the data. And for those who don't know, this is around things like making sure that we don't expose or leak, PII data as we're using these advanced kind of AI systems to give customers and partners, the solutions that they can build on. So it's pretty cool stuff. We should probably have those folks on the show here soon. I don't think we've talked about responsible AI. We talked about AI, but this one specifically around those standards is pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one, sorry, this way. Okay, sorry. Thought I heard something there. The last one was around IoT and some new. Well, it's talking about some of the enterprise level IoT capabilities. That's been, IoT is not a new thing to Azure, but with the edge and the different things that are coming with AI related to IoT, there's a lot of different, new things that we've kind of built there. One of them is around just the processing, the ARM64 processors that are available there. But it goes down even to like some of the stuff we had built before with the MCUs, Azure Sphere that people had used before, and the real-time operating system stuff that was kind of announced at Embedded World, which was a conference, and talking about, basically these kind of miniature or small computers and these things that run at the edge for IoT and how those can be paired with Azure services to provide a complete solution for that. So pretty nice stuff there as well in IT. That's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kale. Cynthia, what do you have?
I have one around the Azure Data Explorer connector that is now generally available through a number of our local platforms. So that includes Power Automate, Logic Apps, as well as Power Apps. And the cool thing about these Azure Data Explorer connector is that now through flows or through your Logic apps or through your Power Apps, you're able to execute KQL queries on your cluster, and you can obviously set up a number of different conditions, whether you want to run it on the scheduled task or you want to trigger it with some reasons. That way you're able to automate a lot of your alerts and notifications to query whatever data set or whatever sets logs that you're looking at. And it also integrates with a number of different Microsoft third-party services using your Azure Data Explorer. So definitely take a look at that.
Awesome, thanks. I have just a few. One is Azure Databricks. The service we all love is now available in some new regions, specifically Sweden Central and West Central US regions. So glad to see that being adopted in all over the world. And another one of my favorites here is Azure SDK for Go is now reached general availability. And this is particularly good for all of us who are building, let's say, extensions in Kubernetes or any language that prefers Golang as an option. Now you can build all those utility style applications using Go and targeting Azure. And then finally, there's a whole slew of updates that came out for Azure load testing. And these include things like allowing splitting of input data across their various test engines. So you could kind of send some data into this engine, some to that engine. You can now provide user-specific JMeter settings that allows a lot more configurability. There is support for customer managed keys. There's support for user-assigned managed identities now. And also, my favorite feature is a quick start test with just any web URL. You just got to point to the URL, and it'll create the test for you automatically just by navigating that website, which is, I think, would make it really easy. You don't have to write the script for the JMeter tests manually. There's a lot of cool features in JMeter. Yeah.
Is that stuff only in like DevOps, Sajid, or where do users that want to take advantage of this load testing stuff, where would they go? Is it Visual Studio? Is it DevOps, or is it pure Azure?
It's primarily used in the portal in Azure. So you kind of it basically allows you to get all the features of JMeter in Azure itself without having to install the whole JMeter environment in your own DevOps. So yeah, and once you set up those tests, then you can execute them remotely, right? You could call an API to say, run this test for me, and it'll go and run the tests, all the entire GMX file automatically for you.
Sweet.
Great. Well, that's a good round of updates. So let's get back to our special guest, Asir. Asir, thank you again for rejoining us on the Azure podcast. Haven't spoken to you in a few months, maybe, or I don't know. It hasn't been that long since you've been on the show. But I know you're still continue to be very passionate about Java on Azure. And I was wondering if you could give us any update in terms of your role in Azure or in the product teams here.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me. I'm Asir. At Microsoft, I'm on point for everything developers need to build, migrate, and scale Java apps on Azure. I'm also a Java dev. I started in 1995 with JDK1 and have been having an amazing time with Java ever since. Java on Azure is a ton of fun because we are working on many, many exciting things to deliver to the customers. And you probably, if you're on LinkedIn or Twitter, you probably see us push from multiple channels, many new things coming from Azure. It's exciting time for Java on Azure.
Yeah, I spend a lot of my time in the FSI space, the financial services industry, and Java seems to be the predominant language there. As much as I would like for them to use .NET as well, they all seem to have Java developers, and it's nice to see, that Azure, I think, is starting to have that breadth of support for Java across all of its product lines, right, including from SDKs to various services. Give us a kind of a flavor for how things have been progressing since we last had you on. I think we last talked about Azure Spring Cloud, I believe, with you, and kind of what's the state of the union as it relates to Java since then?
So Azure Spring Cloud is now called Azure Spring Apps. We have many tiers. We have basic, standard, and enterprise. We can talk a little bit later about the details. In App Service, we now have support for Jboss EAP as a managed offering. So our developers do not have to worry about running infrastructure or running app servers. All they have to do is just simply deploy their WARs or EARs, and everything else is managed in the cloud for them in Azure by Microsoft and Red Hat as well. This way, our developers and customers can simply focus on their business and not worry about the underlying plumbing details. Now we have container apps. So container apps is an exciting one for Java customers. So any customer who like to deploy their containerized image, not worry about the underlying Kubernetes or the underlying infrastructure, or worry about any of the SLAs underneath it. It's a great destination as well. Right? Now, at the virtual machine and AKS level, we have worked with companies like IBM, Oracle, and Red Hat to make sure that compliant, fully supported by Microsoft and these partners, solutions are readily available for our customers. For example, you can run WebLogic in virtual machines. You can run WebLogic in AKS. These are now supported offerings by Microsoft and Oracle. You can run WebSphere traditional on virtual machine, and you can run the WebSphere Liberty on Azure, Red Hat, OpenShift. Similarly, Jboss EAP, you can run Jboss EAP on virtual machines, as well as running Jboss on Azure, Red Hat, OpenShift. These are all fully supported offerings by Microsoft and VMware. So there are many advancements also on the libraries front. Azure SDK for Java has released many iterations, and you would see that life for Java developers becomes easier and easier. On the Spring on Azure integrations, we just released Spring Cloud Azure 4.0, which is a significant evolution from what we have been supporting as 3.0. So many tools also on the way, like we have added Gradle support. We have added many features in VS Code, IntelliJ. I think the lineup is pretty large. There are many engineering teams engaged to ensure that developer experience, the server-side experience, and full support is available for Java on Azure.
Asir, you just mentioned that there are a number of different destinations that our customers or our developers can deploy their Java apps to. Then comes the question of how does one decide where to go given where they start from? And is it from what you've seen so far, do a lot of people quote unquote migrate from one location to another, or do they also modernize in the process?
It is a combination all the time, right? So when we talk about, we generally use the word app modernization. App modernization has many elements, right? Within those elements, one of them is typically an upgrade, right? The upgrade could be at the OS level. Let's say they're running SUSE 12 instead of SUSE 16 or Rail 4, right? So the operating system, then the JDK, probably they're running JDK 6 instead of 8, 11, or 17, right? When they're running their Spring Boot, they're running their Spring Boot 1.x or Jboss EAP App Server 5.0 instead of 7.x, right? So there is an upgrade element, right? They can upgrade at various levels, whether it's operating system or JDK or the app server or the libraries, right? So all of those, there's an upgrade element to it. That's the first element. The second element is transformation, right? So many of our customers are involved in transformation. They may have a plain old Java object that they want to transform it into a Spring Boot app or a Jakarta EE app application, or they have COBOL programs running in mainframes, right? And these COBOL programs, they can transform it into a Spring Boot app or Jakarta EE or Java EE application, right? Some of the examples, we even released a great customer story at the Spring One conference, is Morgan Stanley. Morgan Stanley was running COBOL programs in mainframe, and as part of their modernization, they transformed them into Spring Boot application, right? So this transformation element is pretty popular, And many of our systems integrator in the Java ecosystems are helping our customers, right, to run these transformations. For example, HCL, Infosys, TCS, Wipro, many of these partners, you would see plenty of stories if you go to customers.microsoft.com. So that's the second element, right? After upgrades, transformation. There's a third element. The third element is now that they have an upgraded, transform, or a clean, already clean running application, they can migrate. So that's the third element of the modernization. They're migrating from on-prem to the cloud. So here, most of the time, our customers, when developers, when they decide on, there's always many factors that go into it. It could be a cultural thing. It could be a strategic thing. Or simply asking questions like, hey, do I need infrastructure control? Do I have people to manage and run the infrastructure? If you answer no, I only have a small team, but I have a big business to achieve, then simply worry about the apps. And that's where we have platform as a service, where Azure Spring Apps, App Service, all of these offer many possibilities for you, right? But on the other hand, if you come to the conclusion, hey, I need infrastructure control, and now you slide on to what is your preferred technology? Maybe your preferred technology is Kubernetes, or your preferred technology is OpenShift, or hey, I just can live with virtual machine, right? So you can make that choice based on your technology preferences, right? So these are some higher level questions that they can ask to think about the third element, which is the migration. Then we have the fourth element, which is the most important element. And that goes to, now that you have your application up and running in the cloud, it is like a promised land. So in the promised land, you can do more, right? So optimization could be, I want to manage my secrets using Key Vault. I want to manage my certificates using Key Vault. I want to automate end to end, whether it's provisioning, building, or deployment. I just want to automate end to end. I want to monitor end to end, right? All the way from the request that is coming in from your mobile machine all the way to the back of the system. I want to monitor end to end. So there are many, like high availability, disaster recovery, security, complete, like everything. You can assume the security posture that offered by Azure by taking advantage of several security things, right? So that's part of the optimization. So there are four elements, right? You upgrade, you transform, you migrate, and you optimize. These four elements goes back to your question, Cynthia. And there is a place for everything on Azure that our customers can play with it, our developers, our partners, and our service teams. It's a big ecosystem. It's a great time for Java and Azure to participate in all these elements.
Yeah, going along with that, Asir, I was wondering, like, from the tooling perspective and kind of the latter stuff you were talking about there, there's so many different, like, things, what you called it, the promised land there, like when you're in Azure, right? Like we have all kinds of messaging technology and data storage technologies and all this kind of stuff, right? That's kind of outside of the application, but they provide like unique value. I guess the question I have is like for a Java developer who doesn't know Azure, right? They just know about their application. How do they discover those kind of things? Does any of the tooling kind of help them understand what options they got there, you know?
True. Yeah, I think what happens there is once you bring the application, typically your application carry dependencies on data, cache, messaging, eventing, and directory, right? Many of these are breathing lines for the application. Now, these applications can continue to connect with on-premise systems, particularly when there are too many dependencies on your, let's say, IBM DB2 running on-prem, and there are many applications depending on it. It's not like you can just migrate that DB2 into Azure. So you can run it for some time until all the apps are coming to the Azure, right? So you can always connect. Now, when you have systems where it's all self-contained dependencies, right? Or you reached a point where you can migrate all of them. When they come to Azure, like if you're using Spring Boot or Java E, when you're using VS Code or IntelliJ, there will be some suggestions given to you, right? So now that's one way of picking up. But the other way is whenever your app is talking to on-prem, there's always latency, right? And you'll also have to negotiate your bandwidth through ExpressRoute or whatever connection that you have within your company. But on the other hand, if you can extend your Java or your Spring Boot app to take advantage of super scalable services that we have on Azure for data. We have SQL database, MySQL, flexible, Postgres flexible, Cosmos DB. There are many options there. When it comes to Redis cache, you can run your own Redis cache or take advantage of Azure Redis cache, which is available across the globe. So similarly, Service Bus, Event Hubs, Apache Confluent, Cloud, MongoDB Atlas serving offering is there, right? So many offerings. So that's why you can extend we typically use the word, you can extend your Java application to take advantage of super scalable services that we have on Azure for you.
So why is it that we don't offer DB2 on Azure? Would you just if all these customers using DB2, why is DB2 not on Azure yet? I don't understand. We'll just get all these customers migrating tomorrow.
I think that's a great question.
I asked that in jest, by the way, but I couldn't help but ask it when I heard you say about DB2.
Yeah. I'm hoping the DB2 team is listening to us. Right? It's a great opportunity. I think they have several data packs, so I think it's a great opportunity for IBM to run DB2 on Azure. Right, that way our customers can leverage and extend their applications. Yeah, I agree with you. Azure is a great place for all our partners, right? So.
Yep. Now, but on a more serious note, I did hear you mention about Java support on VMs, AKS, on Azure Container Apps, things like that. And I'm just, I guess I'm just wondering, like, these things can run. You can always run Java on that, right? What's like special to say? Oh, we support Java on these things. What did we have to do to make Java run better in these environments?
So every environment, right? Let's say app servers as an example, right? To make Java run, each of the offerings, there's a managed offering, like we have Java SC, Tomcat, and Red Hat Jboss EAP. So for each of these offerings, right? We have to make sure that there's a rhythm in which we pick up the updates and keep it current for our customers so that when they deploy, it is always up to date for them, right? For any of these. Now for Apache, Tomcat, we work with the community. For Red Hat Jboss EAP, we work with the Red Hat Jboss team, right? Now then, when it comes to a platform as a service, when we tell the customer, you don't have to worry about the app server or the underlying machine, you only have to worry about your application. That means we have done all the plumbing necessary to all the way to the bottom to bolt it down, right? And be clear on where it is extensible, where it is not extensible, right? Particularly when we are managing it for them, right? And that clarity helps them to figure out how to deploy their application, right? So we have teams, big size teams, just focused on managing these for them so that we can support them and our customers can take advantage of them. So every service, there'll be a lot of work like that.
So, let's focus maybe on the Spring Apps, right, which is kind of the new kid on the block. Well, not only the new kid, but the newly renamed kid on the block. So give us an idea as to, why that service was renamed and what's the new SKUs that you talk about that are available there.
Okay. So Azure, if you are familiar with the service, it used to be called as Azure Spring Cloud. We just renamed it to Azure Spring Apps. It was announced by Scott Guthrie and Julia Nielsen at the Build conference. So why did we rename it, right? So the service has expanded in scope. When we started with standard. Now we have basic, standard, as well as enterprise. 3 tiers are available today. And as part of those expansions, we have delivered a ton of functionalities, right? And our customers are also running various types of Spring apps, right? Whether it is a traditional Spring Boot app, Spring Boot REST API, Spring Boot reactive REST API, Spring Batch Processor, or the event processor. So our customers are running varying types of Spring apps, right? So to better reflect what is happening and what we deliver, we just renamed the application as service as Azure Spring Apps. Now we have 3 tiers. Standard is where we got started, and then we added basics. So it's slightly limited so that your dev test can go into basic, right? Now in enterprise, what we did is we added even more features to improve your productivity. So there are lots of ready to go to production features in enterprise. And we also added runtime support. So with runtime, for example, if you are building Spring application, the Spring application will have some dependencies. Most of these coming from our open source ecosystem, right? Now, when you have these dependencies, you're going to depend on the open source support model, right? So now we have added app level runtime support for you. So you can leverage the support and the experts from VMware and deploy your apps in confidence, right? With a lot more confidence, right? And also the support window that offered by OSS is they are shorter windows. So when you get the commercial support, as you start using Azure Spring Apps Enterprise, you're entitled to commercial support. So when you get the commercial support, your support window is longer. So you can update and upgrade at your own pace as opposed to shorter windows, right? So those are all big pieces in Azure Spring Apps Enterprise.
Are there specific workloads that Java or Spring is really good for? If from a developer perspective, I'm coming into this net new and I need to pick up a new programming language or learn about a new framework, what are some things that I would need to consider or that Java is really good for?
So in the cloud, server-side applications, that's where the sweet spot for Java. Now that's a pretty broad category. Now Java is used in all parts of life, all parts of the industry as well, whether it's financial tech or scientific or running your inventory system or your order management system, retail, logistics, pharmaceuticals, you name it, every industry it is there. The key thing is the server-side applications, right? Now, even within server-side applications, there are many possibilities. I'll give you one example. I've seen a broad use of implementing REST APIs or event processors, if it is event-driven systems. So it is pretty broad. It's not like I can name one or two. That's where it excels. But server-side, writing server-side applications, right? Using Java is very popular in the industry. And that's why Java on Azure is a great program for hosting many of those server-side applications.
Yeah, see, another thing I've saw, I think at Build is a lot of talk about this. Was it Tanzu, the Tanzu build system that's used in Spring Apps? I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about that and how, is that from VMware, is it, Tanzu, or?
Yeah, I think one of the pieces that we included in the Azure Spring Apps Enterprise is the Tanzu build service, right? Now, Tanzu Build Service is a bit special. Now, the way to think about is you have the build packs built by CNCF, right? Cloud Native Foundation. Now, those build packs, those are specifications. So it can be implemented by many vendors, right? One of the implementation is by VMware. It's called the VMware Tanzu service. So the Tanzu service is actually, Tanzu Build service is actually bolted into the Azure Spring Apps Enterprise as a managed offering. So you don't have to do anything. It's just available there for you. With that, you can deploy and manage any type of Spring and Polyglot applications. Polyglot applications are like whether any general purpose Java, Node.js, Python, Go, .NET, wiring up all your application performance monitoring, everything can be handled by Tanzu Build Service. Now, in organizations, when they containerize, they typically write a Docker file. There are many ways to write a Docker file. So if you have 50 teams, 50 teams are going to write 50 different ways, right? Whether it's the starting point, base image, or loading the packages, or configuring those packages, configuring agents, placing the actual binary, starting the binary, parameterizing those binaries, right? If you have 50 different teams and there are 10 different things that I just talked about, you can have n number of combinations. So you have to, if you're somebody who's trying to manage that source to container strategy, you will have to think through and come up with some policies, governance, enforcement, learnings, and continue to update it. Or you can take advantage of Tanzu service, which is actually running millions of build, and all the expertise is already burnt into the service, and you don't have to worry about how to write your Docker file. All you have to do is, when you're deploying a Spring Boot app, just simply deploy your jar, or just show where the code is. It'll build up and build the compliant OCI image and keep the OCI image always up to date as well. Okay. So that's where the beauty of Tanzu Build Service walks into Azure Spring Apps Enterprise.
That's great. And I believe in Spring Cloud, I believe underlying there used to be a couple of AKS clusters. Is that still the case with Spring Apps? Is that similar infrastructure under the hood?
It is still there's no change in the underlying infrastructure. The underlying infrastructure is Azure Spring Apps is built on top of AKS. Each service instance has 2 Kubernetes clusters, and they're all fully managed by Azure Spring Apps and are fully abstracted away from developers. And the service runtime elements, like, for example, load balancing, log streaming, custom domain, or many of those service runtime things, they're all running in one of the clusters. In the second cluster is where the apps are running. From there, the apps can talk to any Azure service, external systems, on-premise systems. Your logs, metrics, everything is available in Azure Monitor. You can pick it up using any platform and tools of your choice. You can secure using your directory of choice, including Azure Active Directory. You can automate end-to-end using any platform and tools of your choice. You can develop your application, deploy your application using any development tools of your choice, whether it's VS Code, IntelliJ, Eclipse, Maven, Gradle. You can provision using any of the tools, right? So it's pretty open to make sure that we are able to accommodate our customers' preferences, any preference, yeah.
And did they eventually, or are there plans to integrate Spring Boot Admin with the offerings that we have? I know that was an ask that came up in an engagement that I had before.
Right. So there is a product called Application Live View, which is the newer incarnation of the Spring Boot Administrator. So in the Azure Spring Apps Enterprise, as part of delivering all the productivity and production level features, Application Accelerator will be available as a managed offering sometime this fall. So you don't have to do anything, just it'll be there, and it'll be it'll be very familiar, just like the way you saw in that project, Sajid.
That's great. And one of the concerns early on was Spring Cloud was kind of expensive, at least in the standard tier, for someone to get kicking the tires a little bit. I'm assuming that the basic tier has got a cost-effective starting point now.
Yes, I think when we first got started, we had 16 cores and 32 gigabytes as the base unit, and you can keep on adding how much ever you want, up to 2,000 cores and 4 terabytes of RAM. We reduced that to 8 cores and 16 gigabytes. We're going to further reduce now to 6 cores, right? And that will come out shortly. But right now, it's already lower than it used to be. I'm hoping that eventually it'll go down to 0.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, you can imagine having a serverless version of Spring Apps. That'll be cool.
Yep.
Great. Well, this has been great, Asir. Thank you so much for the complete rundown on all the latest on the Java, Spring, and Azure. Glad to see that you're still, you're still the master in that domain. You certainly have a great passion for it. So it shows when you talk about it. Any more questions for Asir before we let him go, guys?
No, this was great. Thanks again, Asir, for updating our viewers or listeners to this. This is awesome.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you.
And we'll take any updates that you have. We can put them in the show notes if you want to have any links and whatnot. We'll certainly add them in for our listeners.
That's good.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.